Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our May 6, 2026 Board of Douglas County Commissioners work session. Today, we've got staff who will be kicking off a conversation with us as a commission about battery energy storage systems and data centers and digital asset retrieval. For those of you who might be first timers at a work session or watching this work session for the first time, please know that it's for informational purposes only. This is an opportunity for us to, like I said, kick off a lot of conversations that this commission talks about, and an opportunity to hear some preliminary information from staff, discuss amongst ourselves, ask questions. There's no public comment attached to the work session, but of course we have our normal business meeting that begins at 5:30 where we always have general public comment, and folks are welcome to provide any thoughts or reactions to this work session there or reach out to us separately in the future. With that, I believe today I'm turning it over to Sean to intro this item and intro other staff.
Sure, and I just want to kind of kick us off, picking up where you left off, that this is a work session that we're really just trying to get some background information and initial direction from you all as a body. Again, no decisions are being made today, and this is just really about an early step in a very long process, I will say. So I'll turn it over to Carl, and he'll walk through a couple of slides.
Good afternoon, commissioners, and thank you, Sean, for that introduction. As he mentioned, we are still pretty early in the process on a text amendment to address battery energy storage systems, data centers, and digital asset retrieval uses. So why are we here today? Back in July of 2024, the Board of County Commissioners initiated a text amendment to address battery energy storage systems and data centers, including digital asset retrieval uses. And these are uses that are becoming increasingly common in unincorporated areas, not just in Kansas, but across the country. And over the past few years, staff, including myself, have been studying resources from organizations like the American Planning Association, the Department of Energy, and a variety of other organizations. I've been talking with planners and peer communities that are facing similar development pressures. I've been studying codes and projects in peer communities. I've looked at more planning commission packets from across the country than I care to admit. I've been monitoring relevant technological developments, and I've been meeting with a few industry experts and some stakeholders. So why we're here tonight is that this is an opportunity for me to provide an update on where we're at in the process, an update on my research, and where staff has been working on this, but also to talk about the text amendment process and also to obtain feedback from each of you. No application has been received. I'm going to be reiterating that a few times. There's no application under consideration. There is no specific site that is being considered, and I'm also not presenting any draft code language tonight. So what is a BESS? BESS stands for a battery energy storage system. It's an array of batteries that is used to store energy, and they come in a wide range of scales. They can be a small system that you find in someone's garage or in someone's basement to a grid scale project that can be used to power an entire city. These in-home systems, we have dozens, if not hundreds of them in the county already. They're currently addressed through the building permitting process. It's the grid scale projects that would be addressed by the zoning code. Grid scale, or in front of the meter systems, refer to ventilated shipping container-like structures with rows of lithium-ion batteries that are on the inside. And these are typically associated with a substation, a solar facility, a wind facility, a power generation facility, or some large-scale industrial land use that needs continuous power, and it would be mission critical to have a power outage. The batteries take energy in when there's a surplus of energy. So when a power plant, a solar facility, a wind facility, or the grid has a surplus of energy, and then during a peak time, it feeds it back. So from a zoning perspective, what are the main impacts of a BESS? Combustibility risk and thermal runaway is the big one. So what is thermal runaway? A chemical reaction that leads to a rapid increase in temperature. You saw that in the news yesterday. There was a thermal event at the Panasonic plant in DeSoto, but a thermal runaway event is not necessarily a fire. It's a rapid increase in temperature that can lead to a fire. And it's thermal runaway. That's the reason why when you're at the airport checking in a bag, they always ask you, do you have any lithium ion batteries in your bag? So some associated concerns with the fire risk is that our fire officials have expressed concern and rural fire districts may have limited capacity to respond to a battery fire event. And there are also a variety of standards out there from national organizations that we have that are intended to reduce risk. Some other zoning related concerns include visibility and aesthetics and screening. These aren't especially pretty uses, so ensuring that there's adequate screening from houses and from other sensitive land uses to ensure there's adequate separation. And another concern comes from noise. The inverters, the ventilation systems, and the transformers with these uses all generate noise. Some possible ways to address that include having increased setbacks and from a house or from another occupied structure. So I had the opportunity to visit a very small battery energy storage system while on vacation last year. This is a 3.5 megawatt hour battery energy storage system. So as you can see, it's pretty small in scale, but it's these shipping container-like structures. You can see some fans that are associated with that. On the inside of those shipping container-like structures, you have rows of batteries on the inside, as well as a ventilation system to keep them cool. I'm not aware of any large-scale battery energy storage systems operating currently in the state of Kansas, but there was a proposal for one in Saline County that was brought forward last year. So in November of last year, the Saline County Planning Commission was considering this project that was on 15 acres of a 40-acre parcel. It would have a capacity of 350 megawatt hours, so 100 times larger than that small BESS that I visited. The Saline County Planning Commission approved the item in November of 2025. Then in January of this year, the Saline County Board of County Commissioners overturned it because there was a protest petition filed. And as I mentioned, small scale battery energy storage systems are quite common. There are dozens, if not hundreds of them scattered around the county, in people's basements and people's garages. This is what an example of one of those looks like. These are generally between 1 and 20 kilowatt hours. So now moving on to what is a data center. Data center is a facility consisting of structures filled with rows of computers. These computers store data for a variety of clients, and that data can include emails, financial records, documents, cat videos, the list goes on, while also providing processing capacity for a variety of emerging technologies like artificial intelligence and cryptocurrency mining. This is not a new land use, but what we're seeing is an exponential growth of these because of these emerging technologies. The larger or hyperscale data centers are the ones that you've been seeing on the news more recently. Those are often built of cast concrete panels. Smaller systems, though, may be housed in shipping container-like structures or even within an existing structure. And these systems, they can range from thousands of square feet to millions of square feet, and they can cover a few acres to hundreds of acres. Some of these systems are major consumers of water and electricity, especially the ones that have evaporative cooling systems that can use, in some cases, hundreds of thousands of gallons of water per day. But there are also systems that are considered closed loop, so they have lower water demands. So from a zoning perspective, what are the main impacts from a data center? There are a variety of other impacts that can arise from a data center. There are documented concerns about electricity rate increases. That's not something that we can really address from a zoning perspective, but we can address things like infrastructure demand, electricity demand, water demand, noise from cooling systems and backup generators, visual impacts to include lighting. These are very secure facilities, so they're often lit up like a Christmas tree. They want to know who's around these. They often have very tall fences in a lot of cases. Construction impacts. Once these facilities are operational, they generally do not generate very much traffic. But during construction, which can last for years, you have many, many trucks coming in carrying heavy computing material, heavy building material. And there's some concerns about, can rural bridges support that kind of thing? And especially with a larger facility, there are concerns about stormwater, runoff, and wastewater management. This is the closest operational data center I'm aware of to us here. This is in the city of Olathe, just southwest of the intersection of K10 and K7. This is a facility that is leased to State Farm Insurance. It is just under 200,000 square feet, and it was built in 2015. But as I mentioned, these are facilities that come in a wide variety of shapes and sizes. This is a much smaller facility that's currently being proposed in a suburb of the Twin Cities in Minnesota, 55,000 square feet, 5 megawatt capacity. And then on the other end of the spectrum, we have this project that is under construction, and I believe part of it is currently operational. This is on the north side of Kansas City at the intersection of 435 and 169 on the way to Smithville, east of the Kansas City International Airport. This is 1.4 million square feet, serving Meta, the parent company of Facebook and Instagram, and it has a capacity of 599 megawatts. So a question that's come up is, why are we looking at this right now? That text amendment initiation back in 2024 was brought about because of concerns raised by local fire officials, especially related to battery energy storage systems, an increase in national interest and regional interest in these types of projects, as well as proposed projects in the Kansas City area. And we've seen more and more proposals in our neighboring communities for these types of uses. And I want to reiterate, no application is being brought forward right now, and no site is under consideration. Staff is acting proactively to ensure that if and when an application is brought forward, it's guided by clear standards and it's located in an area where infrastructure and services can support such a use. So if we look at our current regulatory framework and our current infrastructure considerations, again, no applications have been submitted. We have had very few, but some very limited inquiries related to standalone battery energy storage systems. But we have not had any inquiries for a data center or for any digital asset retrieval uses. So staff is actively working with other agencies, including rural water districts, fire districts, and public works, to understand how these facilities would impact them. And we want to make sure that their concerns are addressed. We're also looking at existing infrastructure capacity. These key considerations that we have locally, again, infrastructure capacity from electricity availability, would new transmission lines need to be built? Would rural water systems need to be updated? Would roads need to be updated? What kind of impacts would construction have if a massive facility was coming in where construction could take years? That would likely require some temporary housing for workers. That's another consideration. Fire protection and emergency response capabilities. Fire is especially a concern with battery energy storage systems. There are a variety of national guidelines out there governing those. Water supply. and wastewater limitations. There's no sewer district out in the county to take care of the wastewater. So how that would be addressed is still an open question, and water availability. Some of these facilities that use hundreds of thousands of gallons of water per day, that's about the same as what some of our rural water districts deliver in a day. So it could, if one were to come and use rural water, that could double what they deliver in a day or more. There are a variety of environmental considerations as well as staff's ability to process such an application. Some of these applications are thousands of pages long, similar in context to an application for a solar facility, a wind facility. It is that level of complexity for one of these. So a variety of other communities have put in their regulations that any developer would have to pay for third-party review of these types of applications. So how does the county zoning code address these currently? Battery energy storage systems are currently regulated only when they're in connection to a solar facility. There's a section of the solar regs that specifically addresses battery energy storage systems. They are not, however, listed on the permitted use table. So if a developer wanted to build a standalone battery energy storage system, there's currently not a way to permit that in the zoning code. So a quick summary of the existing regulations that we have within the solar facility regulations for BESS: a setback of 500 feet from an existing residence. It has to comply with NFPA, national fire standards. It shall be enclosed in a fence with a self-locking gate. There needs to be non-combustible surfacing within 10 feet, and it shall not exceed a noise level of 60 A-weighted decibels as measured from the property line or 500 feet from an existing residence. BESS in connection with solar would also be permitted with a CUP in any district where utility scale solar would be allowed. So that includes the agricultural district, the transitional agricultural district, the clustered preservation district, which is a primarily residential district, light industrial, general industrial, and the village district. So as staff is preparing these regulations, we have some questions for each of you based on how permissive or not permissive the regulations should be of these types of facilities. Should these uses be permitted in the unincorporated area is still an open question. And if allowed, which zoning districts would be most appropriate? Should approval occur through a discretionary process like a conditional use permit? What infrastructure requirements should be met prior to approval, and what key impacts should be addressed through these zoning standards? As I mentioned, I've been reviewing peer community approaches across Kansas and across the country. And these uses, when they're allowed, are typically allowed in an industrial district or a similar business park type of district. There are two permitting methods that are usually in place: either a by right type of permitting where they would go through a site planning process. There might be some additional standards based on design. There might be some additional setback requirements from residences. There might be some standards that apply to all industrial uses. Then there are also some communities that allow these only through a conditional or discretionary review type of process. And most communities that have specific regulations for these type of uses have specific standards addressing noise, setbacks, infrastructure requirements, safety requirements, and so on. Several jurisdictions within Kansas just in the past few months have adopted moratoria as they're also working on developing regulations for these. And I have a list of those in the document that's been prepared. So this is a table that appears in that document that's part of your packet. As you can see here, the M's, that stands for moratorium. So the communities that have an M on those either have recently or have an active moratorium in place for these uses as they're actively developing regulations for them. So as these regulations are developed for these uses, the key things we'll be looking at are infrastructure requirements. There may be a requirement that a developer provides will serve letters. What a will serve letter is documentation that the developer has talked to the electric company, talked to the rural water district, and that the local utility company has signed off saying they have the ability to serve that use. Noise and nuisance controls, having a certain decibel limit at property lines, setbacks and screenings. Some of these uses, they're so large that any amount of landscaping is not going to screen that particular use. So having as much mitigation as possible is something that could be included. Ensuring that there are standards related to construction, like having haul routes, road maintenance agreements, and construction management practices, having hours of operation set, having certain environmental protections in place, like stormwater management, wastewater management, and continuous monitoring of the soil, the groundwater, those types of things. Ensuring that fire safety standards are complied with from organizations like the NFPA, limiting these types of uses in areas that are identified as especially prone to wildfire, and even the industry group that advocates on behalf of battery energy storage systems. They have some model regulations that they recommend for communities. Even those have in those model regulations that there is coordination with the fire department and that training is offered and even potentially materials being offered to them. Lighting is another concern. As I mentioned, these are high security uses that are mission critical to their organization. So there would need to be standards adopted directing that lighting is to be facing down and away from neighboring properties. Parking is another item to be considered. A lot of zoning codes tend to base parking off the square footage of a facility. Now, if we have a 1,000,000 square foot hyperscale data center with relatively few employees inside, the parking based on square footage could be larger than that facility in some cases. So it would require basing the parking standards off the number of employees in there. And then most of the regulations I look at also have specific standards for decommissioning, requiring a decommissioning plan, requiring some kind of financial assurance if the project were to be abandoned. So as I've been reviewing what has been proposed in some peer communities, a few trends came out. So staff for battery energy storage systems, the overarching recommendation would be if these are to be allowed, allow them with a conditional use permit in districts where other utility scale uses are permitted and have a tiered approach. So have a small scale and have a large scale. So the small scale, like what you saw earlier, the systems that you find in people's garages and hospitals and offices, those would not necessarily require CUP, but the grid scale ones would. For data centers and digital asset retrieval uses, staff believes that those could be consolidated into a single use category and that they could be allowed through a conditional use permit in the light industrial and general industrial districts. Small scale data centers, some of these small scale digital asset retrieval or crypto mining uses take place in people's homes. There have been trends nationally where some states have preempted local zoning authority related to those uses. Montana, for example, requires that municipalities and counties permit in-home digital asset retrieval uses as a home occupation. So if that were to be permitted here, there may need to be some additional standards related to that use. And then should the commission direct staff to prohibit these uses, one or any of these uses, there are a few things to keep in mind. First is that Douglas County does not have any specific uses prohibited right now. So we have a permitted use table in the zoning code. It lists which uses are permitted in which districts, but it does not list any uses as prohibited in all districts. So as part of the ongoing zoning diagnostic, that's something we're looking at. Should we have a list of uses that are prohibited in all districts? Are there certain types of uses that cannot take place in the county? Is that a conversation we're open to having? So that is something we're looking at. And if the commission were to direct staff to prohibit uses like this, it would require initiating a text amendment to establish a list of those prohibited uses, but it would also require working closely with the county's legal counsel. So after this afternoon's meeting, what happens next? We will get to work on drafting these regulations, and then they will go through a public process, which will require review by the Planning Commission, and then it will come before you for a vote. And with that, I'm available for any questions, and I look forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Carl. That was a great presentation. We appreciate the overview and all the research that's gone into it so far. And especially knowing it is such a rapidly evolving conversation nationally. As was mentioned, the industry is accelerated significantly. And so appreciate all the work you've done so far. And I think there's obviously a lot more to dig into. So I'm also looking forward to the conversation. I do have a number of questions, but I'm going to defer to other commissioners first and see if anybody's got one queued up and off the top of their mind that they'd like to ask Carl. Or Tanya's with us here, also our Director of Zoning and Codes.
I think one of the first questions I have is around, so we do know that we have the Clarion Diagnostic Review, which is currently in process. So my first question is, are we kind of putting the cart before the horse, knowing that that draft is currently in process and we don't have the final yet? And so I'm curious if a moratorium is more appropriate, as we know we're waiting for the final, and if we should get their final findings and then determine what is most appropriate for the use tables moving forward, and then move forward with having this conversation based on their final review.
Well, I'll start with just sort of a quick update on the zoning diagnostic. Again, this is somewhat of a process, and I look at it as taking your vehicle to the mechanic and having the mechanic kind of tell you what's wrong with it because you got a check engine light on. So what I mean by that is that there's more to come, and there's a lot of discussions that still have to happen with that. Where I think that's important is that this is a text amendment that was initiated, some time ago when and this is a rapidly evolving discussion. So I think that's somewhat the questions and directions we're seeking from you all is how rapidly do you want us to continue to go and pursue this, recognizing, again, there is a lot of discussion to happen in this space. And I do want to also appreciate, as we've said, this is a very early discussion. There's a lot that still needs to come. So to, whether or not those discussions can dovetail the diagnostic in this, I'm certain that they could. But again, I think why we're here today is to have you all kind of answer, or at least help us in that question. So, Carl, I don't know if you had anything else to add on that.
As far as moratoriums go, there's no moratorium in place currently, but a text amendment has been initiated. The direction that we've gotten from county legal counsel is that it acts similar to how a moratorium acts. If an application for one of these uses were to come in tomorrow, it couldn't be acted on until these regulations are adopted, because these uses are not listed in the permitted use table. There's no zoning district specific to these uses. So they would have to wait until that text amendment is completed.
Thank you.
Earl, I got a question on water districts. Have you checked with all the water districts in the county?
I have sent an email out to all of the water districts in the county, and I've heard back from a few of them. And both of them have said it would require significant updates to their system if they were to accommodate a use that could use hundreds of thousands of gallons in a day.
Yeah, my question was going to be, do any of them have excess capacity?
I would I would suspect that for all of them, it would require significant updates to their systems.
Thanks.
And I just want to take an opportunity to say, this is a little bit to Commissioner Anderson's question. This is where we've seen a little bit of dovetailing with the zoning diagnostic, is that we have reached out to stakeholders through that process, and we are hearing about these types of uses in the context of those discussions, of which the inability to serve at the levels that are being suggested from a water consumption is clearly, not something that we're hearing is possible at this point.
Follow on that a little bit. I've had a few conversations with a few of our water districts and hoping to have more of those. Capacity is already stretched for the ones that I've talked about significantly. And that's not just about the infrastructure that they have, which would be limiting, but also I'm not sure how far their water rights extend. Some of them own their own water rights, and some of them have sold their water rights to the city of Lawrence and have a contract instead. I don't know if there are limits in that contract or if that can be rewritten. So, and even the closed loop systems for a large installation for data center sort of use, I don't want to speak for our water districts, but I would have a hard time thinking that there are any of them that could meet that capacity, even for a closed loop system where, presumably it's not using the same amount of water because it's not doing evaporative cooling, but it still has to be filled periodically and discharged periodically. There's just a lot of things that seem well beyond the capacity of our ability to provide infrastructure in the rural area.
Did you look at any other types of battery storage other than lithium ion batteries? Because there's sodium, there's vanadium, there's a bunch of different types that have less fire risk.
There are a variety of different battery chemistries out there. I'm limited in how much I can answer about each of those. What we're looking at is more from a zoning perspective. What kinds of safety regulations would need to be in place for all of them. My research has mostly been focused on the lithium ones because those are the ones that seem to be proposed most often, especially in some of our peer communities. And the zoning perspective has been where most of my research is focused.
Just want to, we've talked about, I'm just going to call it crypto mining, and lumping that in with data centers as a similar use. But the battery energy storage feels like a very different use. Would it be okay if we talked about one or the other and then kind of switched? Okay. Which one do you want?
I think that's smart, Commissioner Willie, and I mean, we can just go in order, and especially because we already have some BESS regulations on the books related specifically to our utility scale solar. I think so pulling on that thread and the fact that we did include it years ago when we developed those regulations in a very specific usage, I think the conversation to me starts, well, maybe it's a little bit twofold. Is there anything that staff might recommend or that could be revealed in the diagnostics that's happening that suggest there are things about what our current regulations are that should be reconsidered potentially? But more importantly, do we want to allow that type of land use in any other context besides the current one that it's allowed?
I have a couple of questions related to that, if that's right. What zoning districts allow substations? Because one of the things you'd mentioned in here was, one of the questions for us to talk about is, should they be allowed in any zoning district, which there are quite a few that would allow a utility scale use for, for a grid scale, something or other. But I'm thinking more in terms of like, what do we do for substations now? Because that feels more like a compatible use. And, if that's more limited, you mentioned that a lot of times they're co-located with substations. And that may be something that, if we're looking at a zoning, marrying those zoning districts, that we might look to require them to co-locate with substations.
It's possible that if one were to be proposed, it would be building its own substation too. Something I can say, I know that some of them are in the agricultural districts, but with the ongoing diagnostic review, we're looking at whether an additional zoning district is necessary to specifically address those types of uses. Should there be a utility district? Should there be a public or institutional district? Those are all things that we're looking at right now.
And like the city of Lawrence does have those kinds of districts, like if they have a substation in the city of Lawrence, it has a designation within that zoning. And
That's something that is definitely more common in cities.
Another question was about state fire code. Is there anything in state fire code that talks about battery energy storage?
Not familiar enough with the state fire code. That's something that I'll review. But I am familiar that there are a variety of standards out there.
I think my understanding is that we don't have our own rural Douglas County fire code, and therefore we default to the state fire code. So I think there's a lot of things there to be asking about. And if they don't have it addressed, it's possible that they want to or will be working in that direction. They might also have some guidance.
Yeah, I think Commissioner Rowley, to pull on that a little bit, I've been curious, and I think I know the answer, which is nothing much yet, but I've been curious if your research has led you to any statewide, be it fire code regulations, which may be something to dig more into specifically related to battery energy storage systems, but any other state regulatory conversations, murmurs about how to address this. And I'm specifically thinking about like the KCC. So for the Kansas Corporation Commission and utility with governance over utilities, I'm curious if we know much about where those conversations are and how they might be impacting our local control and authority.
And what I can say is that any regulations that are developed would be in conjunction with those and would reference those. There would likely be a clause in those regulations saying all other applicable regulations would need to be followed. For each of these land uses, I know there's not a whole lot out there at the state law perspective.
I do think that as this conversation evolves, that's something that's going to be important for us to know, especially as we're talking about, we're talking about multiple levels of governments here, right? We're talking about rural water districts, rural, largely volunteer fire districts. We're talking about county commission, talking about, the difference between county commission, our purview is just within the unincorporated area. And then there's the municipal considerations too. And where was I going with that? Sorry. I think that part of what I'm mostly curious about is for us to get clear about as a commission and as a community, frankly, is where are the utilities in this conversation in terms of, not knowing that there are data centers in particular, but and battery energy storage systems to a lesser degree so far in the state of Kansas that we're aware of that are developing more and that are having immediate impact on the utility, on energy in particular, which is more regional or statewide. That those are things I want us to understand more and have more information about how to digest what sort of authority in terms of rate setting and, the drawdown of power and the determination of whether or not capacity even exists within a certain grid and if there are close enough substations. All of those things to me they inform whatever decisions we might be making as a body to know like where our role ends very clearly with having any impact on that, but to be well informed about how those, behind the meter conversations are going at a state level or with our utility company in the region would be helpful insight for me to understand better in the future.
one of the reasons I'm glad we're kind of talking about these separately, and we've known that we started within one text amendment, is the battery energy storage, is energy infrastructure, and the data center, et cetera, is drawing from and requiring more additional energy infrastructure. And so to me, they're so different, and my response to them, I feel, is also different. I think it's also tricky, and just talking about battery energy storage, to set a set of regulations around the technology we know and recognize that the same language and the same code could be used for a different technology we don't know yet and don't know how to respond to. And that's why I think, if there's any state or regional guidance kind of on how you make code that is specific enough to be protective, but also broad enough to respond to and protect for the technology we don't know yet. That part's tricky for me. Another kind of framework to think about, and I don't know if this is practical or not, but I'm thinking in terms of like the making a comparison with like the ICL plant, the phosphate plant in North Lawrence. Like, they provide their own emergency response if there's a problem with their product anywhere in the county. And is there something that a utility company would be able to provide that, like, they send their people, like the idea is emergency response calls, their particular response folks, and if that is a model that's ever used for battery storage. I don't know that we know the answer to that, but that's a model I'm curious about.
That's something I'll do some more research about. What I can say is that for both of these uses, regulations often require submittal of an emergency response plan. And once that would be submitted, that's something that local first responders would definitely be looped in on to ensure that their concerns are addressed.
Carl, I want to go back, and I know we're staying on battery energy storage right now, but I want to go back to something you said earlier about moratoriums versus it being a text amendment at the time. You listed in your table the number of counties that have a moratorium. Am I able to learn on that table? Maybe it's there and I didn't catch it. How many are in the middle of a text amendment or something like that, so are in the same sort of legal position that we are?
Believe all of the counties that I listed on there as having a moratorium are in the text amendment process. When a moratorium is issued, part of the reason why that's issued, you have to give a reason why you're issuing a moratorium. And one of those reasons is developing regulations. And I believe that's the case in each of those communities that are listed on that table.
That have a moratorium.
Correct.
And you said you think every community that's on there is developing regulations?
Every community that's on there that has enacted a moratorium, I believe, is developing regulations.
I'm not stating my question very clearly, so I'm sorry. Of the communities that don't have a moratorium, how many are considering a text amendment? Do you know?
That I do not know
Okay.
how many.
Yeah, I'd be interested in that down the line. And then going back to battery storage, right now it's permitted with a CUP as part of a solar project according to our codes, right? In your research, did you find, I mean, we have a whole list of places because that's what our solar code allows. Did you find any that are allowing battery energy storage? That's tough to say for me. Battery energy storage in specific districts, specific zoning districts that isn't attached to it as part of a utility use?
I believe that's the case in Saline County, and there might be a few other examples.
Do you have an idea of what level of zoning it is? Is it industrial? Is it ag? I'm just trying to get an understanding of what other communities are doing.
Off the top of my head, I don't remember exactly which districts they allow it in. That proposal that I referenced during the presentation is in an agricultural area. I don't know off the top of my head what the zoning is.
And last question for now. How many areas do we have in Douglas County that are general industrial? in the unincorporated area?
It's pretty limited. The main nodes that we have of industrial zoning, both as light industrial and as general industrial, are in the Grant Township area. So along Highway 2459 there. And then we also have a smaller node that's kind of on the east side of Lawrence. That area has been zoned either LI or GI. I can't remember exactly which since the 1960s. The theory on that is that it was kind of wishful thinking for some kind of industrial development out there that just hasn't occurred yet.
Okay, thanks.
Farmers Turnpike has some as well.
And aren't we finding with the state fire code that the water requirements for fire suppression in the state fire code for even those light industrial or general industrial, like that's looking like it's beyond the capacity of our rural fire districts. So even though we have land that is zoned that way, it may not be able to be serviced for some of those uses anyway.
Sprinkler requirements for industrial uses really limit what kind of projects can be developed in the county, in part because of water pressure and water capacity and that kind of thing. One of the ways around that is to put in a pump station specific for that use. But of course, that's an expensive add-on for that use.
Of all the uses that were listed, from crypto to data to the battery storage, is there a reason nuclear was not listed in your list?
That's a relatively recent development. That wasn't so much on the radar when this was initiated in 2024. I do know that there are some counties that are working on regulations for that kind of thing. But that is the extent of what I know about any proposed nuclear.
And so it's not something that you're considering adding to this particular use case that you're looking at, knowing that other counties are looking at it and they're getting those requests?
Not at this time.
Okay.
Commissioner, I'd say that that's up to us to determine whether or not we think it's an appropriate time and juncture to initiate that and ask staff to dig into that. But I appreciate the question because I mean, energy technologies are rapidly evolving, and in less than 5 years, we've developed utility scale solar regulations, updated and developed utility scale wind regulations. These energy uses are rapidly increasing, and nuclear is certainly on that curve too. But I do think that they're separate and distinct and quite a different conversation to be having. But it is up to us to initiate whether or not we think that's necessary to do, knowing that this is a significant lift and something like that will be a significant lift too. So, but I think it's part of the conversation more broadly for us as a commission.
Well, and it is something that has come up over the last couple of weeks as we've been talking about battery storage, data centers, and crypto mining. So at least in the unincorporated area in the county, constituents have been speaking to me about nuclear energy as well. And so there are, at least across the county line, there are other companies that are doing this work. And so it at least behooves us to put it on our radar and ensure that as we develop use tables, that we draw a firm line as to what we want and what we do not want in our county, so that whether it is in line with the Clarion Diagnostic Review and their final findings, that we truly understand what is appropriate for our county moving forward. So I think it should be something that we truly consider because it's on the horizon.
And I just want to make sure for members of the public that are watching, we have not been approached for any projects of that nature at all.
Agreed. Yes. But I just want to make sure, since it's
Agreed.
These are conversations that are being had. And so it was not on your list. And so I want to understand why it wasn't on your list, knowing that people are talking about it and it's happening across the county line.
And I just want to make sure from a text amendment standpoint, there's different ways that those can be initiated. Again, as Sarah mentioned, we haven't received, or the planning office has not received any type of application where a determination has been made as to whether or not our code has a space for nuclear energy. We do have different definitions, major utilities in particular as a category. So I just want to be clear on that again, no determination has necessarily been made because again, we haven't really broached that topic and we haven't been approached by anybody for that specific use. So
I think it's something that as a commission we'll need to talk about and decide how we want to move forward and what we want to direct staff to do. I would say for this particular text amendment, I was already a little bit uncomfortable with lumping these three things together, which now I think we can lump two things together. But so I think that's a complication already. So I'd be glad to kind of keep those separate. And this one's been in process for a while, and the other would be starting from scratch.
Carl, you talked about what you need for a moratorium. What do you need for an outright ban?
At the least, it would require initiation of a text amendment to establish a list of prohibited uses. That's something that the zoning code does not have right now. There are currently no uses that are outright prohibited in the zoning code. There are a few that are not possible, but there are none that are straight up banned. So if the commission wanted to prohibit a certain use or uses, that is something that would, one, require initiation of a text amendment, and two, require close coordination with legal counsel.
Yeah, and that's the legal counsel piece of this. There's a lot of statute and there's also a lot of case law that we are not allowed to ban certain things. So I am not even certain if we could ban them.
I know
Something worth investigating.
Yes.
What it might look like is allowing the use up to a certain square footage. That's another thing that could be considered.
I know we talked a lot about the battery energy storage, and I know we're watching time for the big discussion about data centers. I really struggle to see how we could accommodate the kinds of uses we're talking about in the unincorporated area at all. I would think that it would have to come with an annexation into a city for the water infrastructure, the sewer infrastructure, the stormwater, roads, et cetera. Like that's not usually within our purview. It seems significantly outside of it. So that's my feeling with it. I would say that scale gets a little complicated because you said you can do some of these things in your basement. So at what point are we talking about the hyper-sized, mega-sized centers that we have in our heads and that we see in approaching different communities? And how much are we talking about something that would look like any other industrial building in any other industrial zone? Keeping in mind that we don't really have those in the unincorporated area either. So, I mean, if we were going to talk about a size, it still becomes like, are we talking the size of the building? Because as technology changes, that still might draw one large amount of energy now, and in the future, as technology changes, draw considerably more. So if we were going to talk about something by size, I think it would have to be the size of the energy use and the facility.
I've seen some zoning codes that have addressed it from a square footage standpoint and also from a power usage standpoint.
Are you still talking about BS battery, or we've moved on?
Just wanted
Okay,
to
got
check
it.
and
All right.
see if commissioners had any other specific questions to battery energy storage systems. And I also wanted to, my thought about that is that I'm not sure. I don't really think that I will be easily convinced that there are other necessary or appropriate or applicable uses beyond the utility scale solar where we incorporated it. So for me personally, in some ways, I'm thinking about this section of the text amendment as a simpler one, and that might have an easier resolution, depending on obviously how other commissioners feel and what that process through the planning commission and with the public will look like. But and I'm very interested in the idea that a utility zoning district may also be on the horizon. I think that's something I've researched and pondered about before and wondered if it would make sense here, and that this, to Commissioner Rowley's question, the sort of co-location and co-occurrence of utility production, energy production and a substation with battery storage systems makes a lot of sense to me and seems like likely the only appropriate enough use. And that I also see that as a place where it's possible and maybe there's some more clear pathways, if you will, from other communities around the country and other regulations about how to really mitigate the fire risks are significant, right? And we may learn that our departments don't have the capacity for that, and it could be a non-starter, right? And so that's a little bit more to dig into, I think. But the point being that I think it's possible to plan for and mitigate and train for and hold an applicant to account for their investment into that in a way that really mitigates some of those harms, and the impacts are not as large scale or long lasting in my mind. But I still feel personally comfortable with them only associated with the with utility scale energy production, and that I'm not sure what else I would think was an appropriate use for it.
And I could see like the Free State Solar Co-op that has the western part of Douglas County wanting to do that to help balance their energy load. They buy primarily from Evergy. Do they want to buy it? You know, it's cheaper at night and store it and put it out in the day. Like I could just see other needs and uses for strengthening our grid, which is not especially strong or resilient outside of solar. I could see the coal or gas plant wanting to do some storage also. Those are just I don't know what I don't know.
Yeah, fair enough. I think what I would also say about that piece of it is that in the future conversations with that, having some clear understanding about the state fire code specifically, and then what all of the rural fire departments, I know you've been in conversation with them, and that this a reason we're having this conversation is because they expressed concerns years ago, right? But sort of having a better understanding of where each of those departments are at and what the sort of spectrum of that knowledge and experience and what their specific concerns are related to that. So we are, as I much suspected, this conversation is going to take longer than an hour. And so, you know, that we still have some time. It's going on 5 o'clock and we've got some time, commissioners, to dig into some questions about data centers. But I also want to float here to my fellow commissioners whether or not we think a second work session to dig into this conversation more and give more feedback to staff before they begin their sort of next step of early drafting.
I'd rather have it as a general item on the regular agenda so we can allow public comment. I think the APA states public buy-in and comment are important. And in this forum, we can't get that.
And I just want to state, we always welcome public comment, and that's why this is the beginning of the process. And we would never move forward with anything without lots and lots of public comment. So just don't want to insinuate that we don't want public comment.
Are there commissioners that are wanting to look into what and how we would allow of data centers and crypto mining within the unincorporated area? Because I maybe it's my lack of imagination, but I'm not seeing how we would quite supply them.
Fair point, Commissioner Riley. I think we can certainly start there and just determine whether or not there's an appetite amongst this commission for considering that's a possible allowable use, or if we want to have a conversation about non-permitted uses.
Yeah, I think I heard I heard a couple of things. I heard our administrator tell us, I think we need some legal advice here because an all-out ban, it sounds like we may not be able to do, right? I don't know how an all-out ban is different than non-permitted uses, right? How are those two related? I know we can do a moratorium, but a moratorium forever is a ban, right? So we're going to have to figure out how to do that. Also, I'm just kind of interested. The idea, I want to understand more about a different type of zoning district, what that means. So because I mean, this has changed a lot since 2024. The questions we have today are very different than they were before. And I want to understand like what it would take for, if we created a zoning district and somebody said, well, they thought they could meet, then they could ask for a change in zoning, maybe in the future. I don't really totally know how that works yet. And I'm really nervous sort of trying to brainstorm what a different zoning district looks like here. But I'm trying to understand where the space is between a ban, a moratorium, and something that really, here's what it looks like in Douglas County. And as other commissioners have said, it doesn't seem like it's possible in our unincorporated area. And so I don't know how to create code for something that's not possible.
Yeah, I appreciate that position, Commissioner Kelly, and I think I'm thinking about it similarly. And another interesting factor to hear about from Carl today is the fact that there's some state discussion about those home-based occupations and the fact that there are such small-scale examples of these things that we're talking about, which is not a part of the public conversation, right? I think that's probably news to a lot of people. So understanding that better and how we need to ensure that we are at minimum in compliance with whatever the expectation from the state is about allowances for that, for folks in our unincorporated area, and the distinction of that, which is this large, goes to the larger conversation about size and scale and whether or not the size and scale might just be an extremely low limit, and that's that.
And at the Kansas level, I'm not sure that there's much out there for these, but I do know that there are a variety of other states that are specifically addressing these issues.
And we might think in terms of like what would be the appropriate largest size for a rural home business to apply for this, and then they would have to get a letter of service from the energy company, the water district, the fire district, all of those things, which would be an extremely high lift, because I don't know that we can, and the roads from the township, I'm not sure that they could be supplied, but that would also get us to it's not a ban. We have a regulation if you can meet this, but to say like what would be appropriate, like the size of a barn, the size of a garage, like something in that realm. But even so, I think we would struggle to meet. I think our rural services would struggle to meet that.
Currently, it's not an allowable use under home occupation.
Yeah, so I was going to mention that there are certain uses that we don't even allow. So to Commissioner Kelly's point, like we already have certain uses that are not allowable. So what's the difference between an outright ban and then there are certain uses that are just not allowable? Isn't that right?
It depends on the case law and the situation.
Yeah, okay.
So it, like he said, a non-permitted use, you can have some of those and but if it functionally doesn't work, then it's a de facto ban. It's like, how do you ban unicorns? Well, they don't exist. So you don't need a ban on unicorns. So sorry to disrupt anyone who thinks unicorns still exist. So I would just want us to talk to legal counsel in that situation to figure out the difference between kind of those three. But under home occupation, we allow for certain things under home occupation that we at a larger scale have different regulations. So that's a nuance of the code.
Just to add on to what Sarah was saying, I just want to explain what happens when a use is proposed that is not listed in the zoning code. There's a section that details a process for that. If a use is brought forward that is not listed in the permitted use table, it is up to the zoning and codes director and the planning director to determine the most similar use. And if there's no similar use that can be determined, then a text amendment is initiated. And that's the process we're going through right now.
I just because we're talking
There's
about,
a workaround almost.
there's a
process.
process.
Okay.
Yeah. So this is the process in essence, is that the staff initiated or brought forward the initiation of a text amendment because we saw that there was a gap. So again, this is trying to be proactive, and a lot of the research that's been done at the staff level is reflective of, again, a very evolving and changing world here. But I do just want to draw on a little bit of the string to say, what I've heard, at least with BESS, is that there's a scalability question here. And I do just want to bring up the notion that there's a difference between the underlying land use and then how a residence may want to put up a power wall for battery energy storage. So I think we probably just need to work on a little bit more clarity on the definition of what exactly we're talking about with regard to that. So again, I think it's important that we can appreciate that there's scalability and there's nuance in this conversation, which is why this is evolving and will continue to be an evolving conversation.
Carl, a question I have for you, and Tanya, and just staff in general is, as you know, we've talked about how we lumped these two originally three things together. You've talked about how data and cryptocurrency, they're really the same thing, just maybe slightly different.
From a zoning perspective.
Yeah, from a zoning perspective, right, and the usage of the land. Has it been a part of your discussion whether or not it makes sense to bifurcate we initiated as a text amendment about all of these things, and maybe we just keep on that path because we did it. But to Commissioner Willie's point, I mean, I have been curious what staff's perspective is about whether or not we should bifurcate them and talk about a text amendment just specific to the BESS usage, and then separate that from the larger scale, more intensive use of data centers.
What I would say to that, Commissioner, is that's exactly why we're here today,
Okay.
is to clarify from a directional standpoint what you all think is something that we need to continue to have a conversation with the community about, or if there's something that we just outright believe that needs to be banned and go down that path, which, as we've talked about, has a little bit more nuance and complication to it. But I think if you all are in agreement that BSS is its own thing and we need to go down a path on that, that's that side of it. Data centers and how that is handled could be a different thing. So that's your discretion. That's the direction we're looking for.
I would,
Go ahead, Commissioner Lee.
I'd be glad to see them split. I think they're very different animals.
Agreed, split. BESS by itself, data centers, crypto mining, totally on its own, moratorium until we figure out exactly where we need to go. And yeah.
So in saying that, I just want to make sure, so we can come back and do a little bit more work on BSS and have those conversations and try to work through that process. Just recognizing the time and the complexity of data centers. If we're going to set that aside, we can continue to have discussions and reach out to stakeholders, but two different paths, I guess, is what I just want to clarify.
Yeah, I think I support two different paths because I think they're two different levels of intensity of usage, intensity of conversations, different types of mitigations. There's some overlap there, certainly. But we've already, we're already somewhere with the battery energy storage systems. We already have some regulations around that. So that's another reason for me, I think, to split them, and that maybe, if that's how we're moving forward today, that the conversation about BESS, continues down this track of a text amendment and some sort of recommendation from staff coming back. I think staff will let us know if they think another conversation like this is helpful before a recommendation comes forward on that. But I see that one that is maybe a little further along in the process, if you will, still some stuff to unpack and figure out there. And that the data centers are something that I think there's just obviously a lot more to unpack there. I personally think that another study session and opportunity, always followed by a business meeting with public comment opportunity, would be helpful to, because we didn't get to many of those details today, besides the overview that we got from you, Carl. And there's a lot there. And obviously a lot of community interest and conversation. So I think that in addition to thinking about how that conversation looks separate and bringing it back to us for some further study and dialogue like this, also thinking about what types of community engagement we want to start considering, similar to some of the processes that we had related to utility scale wind and solar, and thinking about how we want to start soliciting feedback and facilitating some community conversations, which is what I know most people are interested in. So that's another reason for me that I think that they're two separate and distinct conversations. My position about a moratorium is that there's no point. And that may be an unpopular opinion for a lot of folks, but the fact that we have a de facto moratorium is sufficient for me. And quite frankly, that's a strategy for me too. That's the point of initiating the text amendment and understanding that that process triggers that and gives time and space for a process to play out. And any developer who may be speculating development here, which quite frankly, for a whole variety of reasons, I think we already know it's that there have been no formal conversations or requests had with staff, and also that there are, as has been noted just briefly in this meeting, a number of barriers and significant issues that would have to be overcome for any applicant to consider something even on the smaller scale side of what these sites can and do look like in some communities that have gone through a little easier, if you will, in places that have either decided to allow it by right or who have a lack of zoning and codes and therefore no ability to sort of enforce it. We're in a different position, and we can take time to understand this issue and unpack it more significantly and determine what regulations should say and how hemmed in the possibility of it is. And to Commissioner Willie's point, whether or not an applicant would ever be able to get over those hurdles and get will serve letters from all of the necessary utilities is a whole other thing. And in the meantime, the technology is going to continue to rapidly develop. The federal landscape regulatory wise, and whether or not, this is a big conversation in Congress. So whether or not we'll even maintain local control is a big fat question mark in the universe. So there are just a lot of moving parts to this. And I think that, I will also just say, like, as a preview for when we come back to this conversation about data centers, that to me personally, based on my research and knowledge so far, on-site power generation is the only feasible way for it to be possible in a community of our size and scale, or most places that can truly mitigate many of the factors that we're talking about. And I think that that's maybe where the industry is headed. How soon, I don't know. Whether or not that could be regulated at a federal level, I don't know. But as has been mentioned, there's a lot of layers to it here. But right now we're in a position where these uses are effectively not allowed because we don't have anything that describes how they could be allowed and how they would be permitted. And that fact remains true until and unless we finalize a text amendment. And as has happened in this community before, that can take years.
So if we have a de facto moratorium, how can we then initiate guidance from legal to inform the next work session?
We can, but because we're considering a text amendment, we can continue to study and research. So, we can reach out to legal. I want to be clear though, are we talking about a moratorium or ban on data or on both?
I think it's about providing us information and guidance around what that would look like for those two potential bans, if that would be the direction that we would go in on crypto and or data centers, because those were the primary questions that arose.
But not battery energy storage is already allowed for in piece in our code.
And I think that was the direction that, since we split them apart.
Be clear that what we're talking about.
Yeah, okay. So that's what I understood. Since we split them apart, batteries over here, and then we have the other two uses that are in question, that legal could potentially provide some insight around what would a ban look like? Is it even allowable?
Yep. Okay. Yeah,
for the next work session? So then we're not, we're being just really efficient with our time.
And what is the commissioner's thoughts on how quickly that would come back to you all?
Well, I just want to, sorry to interrupt, but it's come up a couple of times, and I think it's just important to note. So the diagnostic review is something that's underway, and I think that'll probably come before you all in the next 60 days, 60 to 90 days. So I think that's going to be very informative, back to your earlier comment about what and what can occur from a legal standpoint, what should occur. So I want to put that out there, that there is a bookend to that conversation that may help some of this discussion about a prohibited use table, if that's the direction you all would like to proceed.
Or is the commission comfortable with us not
Yes.
coming back on data centers until after the Clarion diagnostic, if I can be clear?
That was going to be my suggestion,
Okay,
was
that'd
that
be great.
based on, I mean, I think to your question, Commissioner Anderson, and to the discussion we've had about the, the possibility that that might reveal to us or recommend to us that there are other zoning areas to consider, and that impacts this. So I do think that that would be informative to us, and that it gives time and space to just pay attention to how the conversation develops. I really am paying attention to whether or not Congress passes something, and so that could change the conversation in the next couple of months. So I think that if Clarion is going to be, available to present to us this summer, that not too long after that, maybe after our budget, we all get through budget midsummer, would be an appropriate time. If other commissioners agree.
I think we've shared some thoughts and directions and a lot of our curiosities and the things that we don't know. And I think that will hopefully and healthily trigger a lot of community conversations that come back to us and that we can seek out also. So I think we've made some assumptions about some of our rural service providers that this would be a stretch to provide. We may hear back that they feel very differently. I'm glad for kind of kicking this off, and we will certainly hear a flurry of things from all perspectives in the next short time.
Commissioners, any other burning questions at the moment? Staff, do you have what you need from us for the moment? Okay, great. Thank you so much. With that, we are recessed until our 5:30 business meeting.